when the master of mankind fell. Nobody noticed at first. Silas Corvin wasn't supposed to be there. As a low-ranking menial clerk in the Imperial Palace's administrative district, his security clearance ended 3 kilometers from the Sanctum Imperialis. His entire existence revolved around managing supply requisitions for the Terran defense batteries, a job so monotonous that entire months blurred together in his memory. He was 43 standard years old, unremarkable in every way except for an unusual resistance to psychic influence that had earned him his position. The Administratum valued such traits in personnel who worked near the palace core. That morning had started like any other. Wake at 0500 hours. Nutrient paste for breakfast. Report to Station 7 Theta by Oro 600. Process requisition forms until 2200. Sleep. Repeat. The machinery of the Imperium ground forward on the backs of billions like him, anonymous cogs whose names would never be remembered. But the data slate malfunction changed everything. It happened at 0847 hours. His primary terminal simply died, its screen going black despite all diagnostics showing green. Standard protocol demanded he report to the Tech Priest Shrine 3 levels down. Simple. Routine. Except when he arrived, the shrine was empty. Not abandoned. Empty. As if every Tech Priest, Servitor, and Acolyte had simply vanished mid-task. Incense still burned in the censers. The smell of sacred oils hung heavy in the recycled air. Silas stood in the doorway, confusion warring with growing unease. In 17 years of service, he'd never seen a shrine unmanned. The mechanicus were nothing if not obsessively punctual. Their rituals ran like clockwork, each prayer timed to the microsecond. For them to simply not be here violated every pattern he understood about how the palace functioned. He checked his chronometer. 0851 hours. 4 minutes since the malfunction. 4 minutes that suddenly felt like an eternity. The Vox system crackled to life, startling him. Static poured through the speakers, thick and distorted. Beneath it, he thought he heard voices. Thousands of them. Overlapping. Speaking in languages he didn't recognize. Then silence. Complete and absolute. That's when the first tremor hit. Not an earthquake. Silas had experienced those during his youth on a frontier world before being tithed to Terra. This was different. The vibrations started deep, below conscious perception, and built slowly. It felt like the entire palace was resonating at a frequency just outside human hearing. The floor beneath his feet didn't shake. It rippled, like disturbed water frozen in metal form. His inner ear rebelled. Vertigo seized him, and he stumbled against the shrine wall, knocking over a candelabra. The blessed flames went out instantly, as if snuffed by an invisible hand. In the sudden dimness, the shrine's shadows seemed to deepen, to move with purpose. Silas ran. The corridors outside were wrong. He'd walked these passages daily for years, knew every turn, every intersection, but now they looked subtly different. The murals covering the walls depicted scenes from the Great Crusade, the same ones he'd passed 1,000 times, except the figures in them had changed position. A space marine who'd been facing left now faced right. A banner that displayed the Aquila now showed something else, something that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on it. He quickened his pace, breath coming faster. The palace was enormous beyond human comprehension. 24 billion souls lived and worked within its adamantium walls. Its corridors stretched for thousands of kilometers. Its spires pierced the clouds. Yet now, in this moment, Silas heard nothing. No footsteps, no distant conversations, no hum of machinery, just his own breathing and the soft sound of his boots on marble floors. The bodies started at intersection 7 Gamma. 3 adeptus custodes lay sprawled across the polished floor in poses that suggested they'd fallen mid-stride. Their auramite armor gleamed gold even in the dim emergency lighting. Guardian spears lay beside them, the master-crafted weapons appearing almost mundane without their wielder's supernatural grace to animate them. Silas approached slowly, dread coiling in his stomach like a living thing. No wounds marked their bodies. No blood stained the floor. No signs of struggle or combat. They simply lay there, as if sleep had claimed them instantly and without warning. except their eyes were open, wide, staring at nothing. The expression on their perfect, ageless faces was one Silas had never seen on a custodian before. Terror. He'd watched the Emperor's guardians from afar many times, seen them moving through the palace with that fluid, inhuman grace that marked them as something more than human. They radiated certainty, absolute confidence in their purpose and abilities. Death itself seemed to bounce off them like rain from ceramite. Yet here they lay, dead, brought down by something that left no mark but had nevertheless snuffed out their lives with casual ease. Silas's hands trembled. He tried his vox bead, keying the emergency channel. Static answered. He tried again. Same result. The communications network was dead. Or worse, something was deliberately preventing transmission. He looked down at the fallen custodians again, his mind struggling to process the implications. If they could fall, what chance did anyone else have? He needed to report this. Needed to find someone. Anyone who could explain what was happening. Silas stepped over the bodies carefully, unable to shake the irrational fear that they might suddenly animate. The corridor beyond curved left, opening into a junction he didn't recognize. The walls here were bare adamantium, industrial-grade construction that predated the palace's later decorative phases. No murals, no gilding, just raw metal and harsh lighting. More bodies lay ahead. A tech priest slumped against a wall, mechadendrites coiled limply around his augmented body. His biological eye was open, staring. Silent sisters in their distinctive armor formed a circle in the center of the junction, having fallen facing outward as if defending against an attack from all directions. Their null presence should have made the air feel empty, dead to psychic influence. Instead, Silas felt pressure building in his skull, like water accumulating behind a dam. Something was wrong with reality itself. He'd felt psychic phenomena before. Brief flickers when unsanctioned psychers were discovered and purged. The presence of astropaths always registered as a kind of background hum in his awareness. But this was different. This was massive. An ocean of power pressing against the thin membrane separating the material universe from something else. Something that wanted in. Silas ran faster now, abandoning caution. The junction opened into a gallery overlooking the processional way, one of the palace's grand arterial corridors. What he saw made him stop dead. Thousands of people filled the passage below. Tens of thousands, an entire ocean of humanity flowing in eerie silence toward the palace's inner chambers. Nobles in ceremonial dress, soldiers still gripping their weapons, scribes clutching data slates, servitors shambling forward on augmented limbs, all moving with the same dreamlike compulsion, their faces blank, eyes unfocused. They were sleepwalking, every single one of them. The psychic pressure intensified. Silas gripped the gallery railing, knuckles white. His nose began to bleed. Copper filled his mouth. The crowd below continued their march, oblivious to his presence. Oblivious to everything except whatever invisible force drew them forward like iron filings to a magnet. He should have turned back, should have barricaded himself somewhere and waited for sanity to return. Instead, he descended the gallery stairs and joined the flow. Something deeper than conscious thought compelled him. A need to understand, to witness whatever lay at the end of this surreal procession. The crowd thickened as they approached the inner palace. The pressure in Silas's skull built toward unbearable levels. Colors began bleeding into each other at the edges of his vision. Purple mixing with gold, green seeping through shadows, hues that shouldn't exist in nature manifesting in the corners where walls met ceiling. The very air felt thick, resistant, as if reality itself had become viscous. Around him, others began to falter. A soldier stumbled, dropping his laser gun. A noblewoman fell to her knees, hands pressed against her temples. The sleepwalking had fractured into something more chaotic. Some still moved forward in the trance-like state. Others fought against the compulsion, faces twisted in silent agony. Then the screaming started. A man ahead of Silas collapsed, clutching his head. His mouth opened wide and sound poured out. Not words, just raw animal terror given voice. Others joined him. The corridor filled with howling. Some of the afflicted began tearing at their own flesh. Others simply dropped and stopped moving, their minds unable to withstand whatever force was overwhelming them. Silas pushed forward, driven by that same inexplicable compulsion. The crowd parted around the fallen. Nobody stopped to help. Nobody even seemed to notice. They just kept moving toward the Sanctum Imperialis, drawn like moths to a flame that would surely consume them. The doors to the sanctum stood open. This alone represented an impossibility that Silas's mind struggled to accept. Those doors were legendary. 10 meters of blessed adamantium, warded with every protective seal the mechanicus had devised over 10 millennia, keyed to open only for the Emperor himself or by his direct command. They hadn't opened in living memory. Some said they hadn't opened in centuries. Yet they gaped wide like a wound in reality itself. Golden light spilled through the opening, but it was wrong, flickering, unstable, like a candle flame in strong wind. Silas could see figures kneeling inside, hundreds of them. Custodians, high officials, priests of the ministorum, all prostrate on the sanctum floor in attitudes of worship or despair. He stepped through the threshold. The Sanctum Imperialis was vast beyond any chamber Silas had ever entered. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness that the golden light couldn't penetrate. Columns the size of hive spires rose at regular intervals, each one carved with the history of the Imperium's founding. The floor was polished marble shot through with veins of precious metals, reflecting the light source at the chamber's center in fragmented patterns. There, rising like an artificial mountain, stood the golden throne, and upon it sat the Emperor of mankind. Silas's mind tried to process what he saw and failed. His psychic resistance, the trait that had protected him from lesser phenomena his entire life, proved utterly inadequate against this. The figure on the throne was dissolving, not dying, not decaying, dissolving, coming apart at a fundamental level. The Emperor's golden armor cracked like ancient pottery. Through the fissures, not flesh showed but light, raw psychic energy bleeding out into real space. The master of mankind, the being who had walked among humanity for 40,000 years, who had conquered Terra and launched the Great Crusade, who was worshipped by some as a god despite his own denials, was unraveling. His face was still partially intact, perfect features carved from living gold, eyes that had seen the birth of civilizations and their deaths. But even as Silas watched, unable to look away despite the pain it caused, those features fragmented, gently, like mist dispersing in morning light. The Emperor's hand moved slightly, fingers uncurling from the throne's armrest. Silas felt rather than heard words forming directly in his mind. Not speech, not telepathy in any traditional sense. This was something more primal, the transfer of pure concept from one consciousness to another. It begins. The psychic shockwave that followed flattened everyone in the sanctum to the floor. Silas's skull felt like it would split. He screamed without meaning to, adding his voice to the chorus of agony echoing through the chamber. Around him, others writhed or wept or simply stared in catatonic horror at the sight before them. The golden throne itself began to crack. Hairline fractures spread across its surface like a spiderweb of doom. The ancient technology that had sustained the Emperor's mortal form for centuries, that had allowed him to maintain the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, groaned under impossible strain. Warning runes blazed across control panels. Tech priests who'd been maintaining the throne's systems collapsed, their augmented minds overwhelmed. Then the Astronomicon went out. Silas felt it happen. That psychic beacon, visible from half the galaxy away, the lighthouse that guided every navigator through the treacherous currents of the warp, simply ceased to exist. One moment it burned with the power of 10,000 psyker souls sacrificed daily to fuel it. The next, darkness, absolute, complete, final. In that moment of lightless horror, Silas understood what this meant. The Great Crusade had been underway for 200 years. Thousands of expeditionary fleets scattered across the galaxy, all dependent on the Astronomicon to navigate. Without it, they were blind, lost in the warp, with no way home. Ships would drift forever in that hellish dimension, their crews slowly going mad as demonic entities picked them apart. Trillions would die. Not immediately, but inevitably. The Imperium supply lines would collapse. Worlds would starve. Communication would fail. Every planet would become an island unto itself, alone in the dark. But that wasn't the worst part. Silas realized this with creeping dread as new light began to fill the sanctum. Not the golden radiance of before. These were sickly colors. Purple like infected flesh. Green that burned the retinas. Shades that existed outside normal perception, that infected the mind just by being observed. The Emperor hadn't just been guiding humanity. He'd been holding something back. The psychic wards protecting Terra. The barriers separating reality from the warp. The very laws of physics in the Sol system were sustained by his will. And that will was failing. Through the sanctum's cracking roof, Silas saw Terra's sky beginning to tear. Not clouds, not atmosphere, reality itself. A wound opened in the fabric of existence, and through it, the warp started bleeding in. Raw chaos given form. The realm of pure thought and emotion made manifest in ways that violated every natural law. The kneeling figures around Silas began to change. Subtle at first, a finger bending the wrong way, skin rippling like disturbed water, hair growing longer, changing color, sometimes becoming something that wasn't hair at all. The warp was seeping in through the cracks the Emperor's dissolution had created, finding purchase in unprotected minds. A custodian twitched. His auramite armor split along invisible seams, and something wet and glistening pushed through. Not full corruption. Not yet. But the potential for it. The raw stuff of chaos testing the boundaries of this new, vulnerable reality. The Guardian's face contorted in agony as he fought against the transformation, his legendary willpower temporarily holding back the inevitable. Silas scrambled backward, hands slipping on marble that had begun to feel disturbingly organic. Warm, pulsing. The sanctum itself was changing. Sacred geometry twisted into new configurations. The columns depicting imperial history started showing different scenes. Futures that might be, pasts that never were. The very foundation of the palace groaned as warp energy infected its structure. He had to get out, had to warn someone. Anyone. Silas gained his feet and ran for the doors, nearly tripping over bodies. Behind him the screaming intensified. Some voices remained human. Others had acquired tones that shouldn't emerge from human throats. Bass notes that vibrated bone. Harmonics that shredded sanity. The corridors outside had transformed into a nightmare. The sleepwalking crowds had fractured into panic. People stampeded in every direction, driven by primal terror they didn't understand. The palace's artificial day cycle had failed, plunging everything into strobing emergency lighting. Between flashes of red illumination, Silas saw things that couldn't exist. Shadows with too many angles. Walls that breathed in rhythm with some cosmic heartbeat. A servitor whose exposed brain unit had begun speaking in binary cant that resolved into prophetic warnings. The floor in some sections had become transparent, revealing depths beneath that went down further than the palace's foundations should allow. Into darkness, absolute. Into possibilities, terrible. Silas ran without direction, survival instinct overriding rational thought. Left turn, right turn. Straight through a chamber where Medici staff stood frozen like statues, mid-procedure, their patients abandoned on operating tables. Every junction brought new horrors. Every corridor revealed fresh impossibilities. He found himself in a gallery overlooking the palace gardens. What he saw froze him in place despite his terror. Terra's sky was splitting. Not metaphorically. Not in some abstract psychic sense. Physically splitting. A wound in reality stretched from horizon to horizon, and through it, the warp spilled into normal space like infected blood from a gaping wound. Colors that had no names in any human language painted the clouds. Shapes that hurt to perceive moved through the breach. The planet's orbital defense platforms were firing. Lance batteries that could destroy battleships poured coherent energy into the wound. Macro cannons launched warheads the size of buildings. For brief moments, their weapons created bubbles of normality, pushing back against the warp's encroachment. Then the bubbles collapsed, consumed. The platforms themselves began to vanish, just gone, swallowed whole by the expanding tear. Ships in high orbit fled or died. Silas watched a battle barge, its hull decorated with the iconography of the Emperor's own legions, simply cease to exist as the warp touched it. No explosion, no debris. One moment it was there, the next, it wasn't. As if reality itself had edited it out of existence. Every Vox channel, every communications array, every speaker in the palace carried the same message on eternal repeat. A woman's voice, calm and emotionless despite the words she spoke. Imperial Emergency Protocol, Alpha Omega 7. The Emperor is fallen. The throne is empty. The Astronomicon is dead. All personnel implement contingency exodus. May the Emperor protect us all. The message looped. Again, again, again. Each repetition hammering home the finality of what had occurred. Silas sank to his knees on the observation deck, his legs unable to support him anymore. Through the torn sky, he could see things moving, vast, incomprehensible. The denizens of the warp drawn to Terra like predators scenting blood in water. Around him, the palace continued its transformation. What had been the jewel of the Imperium, the seat of humanity's greatest achievement, was becoming something else. Something awful. The warp's influence spread like infection through a wound, turning gold to brass, marble to flesh, reality to nightmare. A group of survivors burst onto the observation deck, led by a Sister of Silence. Her presence created a small bubble of psychic calm in the madness. The null field she emanated pushed back against the warp's encroachment, giving those near her momentary respite. She saw Silas and gestured sharply. Her meaning was clear even without words. Follow or die. Silas followed. They moved through the palace like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The sister led them through passages that seemed more stable than others, areas where the warp's influence hadn't fully taken hold. Behind them, screams echoed. Ahead, uncertainty awaited. Terra was a world of trillions. How many had already died? How many more would perish before whatever this catastrophe was ran its course? They emerged into a hangar bay where a few ships remained. Imperial shuttles, personal transports. Nothing military grade, but anything capable of breaking atmosphere. Other survivors converged on the location. Soldiers, officials, civilians. All hierarchy abandoned in the face of extinction. The strong helped the weak. The well-armed protected the vulnerable. Crisis had stripped away all pretense. A tech priest was performing emergency rites over a Thunderhawk gunship, trying to coax its machine spirit into functionality. The vessel's hull bore scorch marks from atmospheric entry. Old damage, but it looked intact, space-worthy. Will it fly, someone asked. A captain by his insignia, his uniform was torn, blood matted his hair. The tech priest's mechanical voice crackled. The Omnissiah willing. Perhaps, maybe. Probability of survival, 14.3%. Better than staying, the captain said. He turned to address the growing crowd. Anyone who can fit, get aboard. We make for orbit. Try to reach the fleet anchorages before... The hangar's far wall exploded inward. Not from conventional weaponry. This was something else. The adamantium simply peeled away like wet paper, revealing the Terran night beyond. Except it wasn't night anymore. The sky burned with impossible colors, and through the breach came things. Demons. Silas knew the word from restricted texts, from whispered warnings about the galaxy's deepest horrors. Lesser entities of the warp given form through the Emperor's death. They weren't fully materialized. Not yet, but they were trying, pushing through from their realm into reality, taking advantage of the psychic catastrophe to manifest. They looked like nothing and everything. Contradictory forms that shifted with each blink, claws that were also tentacles, eyes that opened on surfaces that shouldn't have faces. They moved with predatory grace toward the survivors. The Sister of Silence strode forward to meet them. Her null presence created an aura of reality around her, and where she walked, the demons recoiled. They couldn't fully exist in her vicinity. Her very nature was anathema to them. Other sisters joined her, forming a line between the entities and the civilians. Behind them, soldiers opened fire. Laser gun beams carved through demonic flesh, but the wounds closed almost instantly. Bolt shells exploded inside monster bodies, tearing them apart, yet they reformed seconds later. These were creatures of thought and emotion. Physical damage meant nothing unless backed by willpower, strong enough to deny their existence. "Go!" the captain roared. "Everyone on the ship! Now!" Silas ran with the others. The Thunderhawk's assault ramp was down. People scrambled aboard, packing into a troop bay designed for 40 Space Marines. Hundreds tried to fit. The vessel listed under the weight. Its engines screamed in protest as they ignited. Through the open ramp, Silas saw the Sisters of Silence making their stand. One by one, they fell. Even their incredible powers couldn't stand forever against the tide pouring through reality's wound. A demon, this one maintaining a more stable form, tall and aristocratic with too many joints in its limbs, backhanded a sister across the hangar. She hit a support column hard enough to dent it. Didn't get up. The Thunderhawk lifted off. Too many people aboard. Not everyone had made it. Some still ran toward them, hands outstretched. The pilot had no choice. Stay and they all died. Leave and some might survive. The ramp closed on screaming faces. Acceleration pressed Silas against the bulkhead. The vessel's ancient inertial dampeners struggled with the load. Around him, people prayed, wept, held each other. Some just stared at nothing, minds broken by what they'd witnessed. Through a viewing port, Silas watched Terra fall away beneath them. The palace, that magnificent structure that had taken centuries to build, was changing. Spires warped into new configurations. Gardens of sculpted marble became forests of organic matter. The Sanctum Imperialis itself glowed with unnatural light, a beacon for every horror in the warp. The sky was more tear than atmosphere now. The wound in reality had expanded beyond any hope of natural healing. Through it, Silas glimpsed the warp itself, that hellish dimension where physical laws held no meaning, where thought became substance, where humanity's darkest emotions congealed into sentient malevolence. The Thunderhawk shook as it passed through the barrier between normal space and that infected zone. Warning klaxons blared. Hull integrity alarms screamed. But the ancient vessel held together through pilot skill and the Emperor's last blessing. They broke into orbit to find chaos. The Terran orbital infrastructure was dying. Thousands of stations. Shipyards the size of continents, defense platforms that could crack planets, all failing simultaneously. Some fell into decaying orbits, burning up in the atmosphere. Others simply exploded as warp energy overloaded their systems. Ships collided in the confusion. Escape pods launched in every direction, their occupants hoping someone, anyone, would pick them up. The naval anchorages were a tempting organization. Silas saw capital ships, battleships and grand cruisers bearing the icons of the Great Crusade, trying to form defensive perimeters. But there was nothing to defend against. The enemy wasn't invading. Reality itself was surrendering. "Where do we go?" someone asked. The question hung unanswered. Terra was lost. The palace was lost. The Emperor was gone. Where could they possibly go that would be safe? The pilot's voice crackled over the Vox. "Fleet Anchorage Gamma 7 is accepting refugees. We make for them." After that, he didn't finish. There was no after that. Not really. As they limped toward the anchorage, Silas looked back at Terra one final time. The birth world of humanity. The cradle of their species. It was still there, still mostly intact. But it was changing. The warp's corruption spread like cancer through its geography. Entire regions disappeared beneath reality storms. Other areas twisted into configurations that defied Euclidean geometry. How long until the whole planet was consumed? Days? Hours? And then what? If Terra could fall, what world was safe? The Emperor's death had torn away the Imperium's only true protection. Every planet was now vulnerable. Every system exposed. The Great Crusade's conquests meant nothing if there was no center to hold them together. Silas closed his eyes and tried to pray. But prayers to the Emperor rang hollow now. He was gone, dead, dissolved into light and memory. Humanity's God had died, and in his death he'd left them naked before the storm. The Thunderhawk docked with the anchorage. Refugee processing was minimal. They were simply herded into holding bays with thousands of others, all waiting, all hoping, all silently wondering what came next. Silas found a corner and sat, hugging his knees to his chest. Around him, the murmur of voices created a background hum. People sharing stories, comparing what they'd seen, trying to make sense of the senseless. A woman nearby was weeping. My children were at school, in the Palace District. I couldn't reach them. I tried, but her voice broke. A soldier stared at nothing, saw my entire squad get taken, just changed, started speaking languages I didn't know. Their eyes went wrong. Had to put them down myself. An official in fine robes sat with his head in his hands. The council. They were in session when it happened. Thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. Gone. Just gone. Each story was a fragment of the larger catastrophe. Terra's 24 billion souls experiencing their own version of apocalypse. How many had survived? How many were dead or worse? Hours passed. Or perhaps days. Time felt slippery in the anchorage. Announcements crackled over the Vox sporadically. Updates on the evacuation effort. Lists of ships departing. Warnings about infected zones to avoid. The bureaucracy of disaster continued, even as civilization crumbled. Then new information arrived. Information that made Silas's blood run cold. The fleet anchorages had received reports from across the Imperium. The Astronomican's death hadn't just affected Terra. Every navigator in the galaxy had felt it simultaneously. Ships in the warp found themselves blind, unable to chart courses. Some had emerged into real space light years from their intended destinations. Others hadn't emerged at all, simply lost forever in that hell dimension. The Great Crusade's expeditionary fleets were scattered, isolated, blind. Some were trying to make their way back to Terra using conventional drives, a journey that would take decades or centuries. Others had gone silent, presumed lost, and worse. Without the Emperor's psychic might holding it back, the warp itself was becoming more active. Stable routes were collapsing. Safe passages were becoming death traps. Demons manifested with increasing frequency on ships and planets alike. The barrier between reality and chaos was thinner than it had ever been. The Imperium was dying. Not quickly, not cleanly, but inevitably. Like a body whose heart had stopped, it would take time for all the extremities to realize they were dead. But death was coming nonetheless. Silas listened to these reports with growing numbness. His mind couldn't fully process the scale. Millions of worlds, trillions of souls, all doomed because one being, one crucial, irreplaceable being, had fallen. Why had the Emperor died? That question gnawed at everyone. Had it been assassination? Natural death, if such a thing could apply to a 40,000-year-old immortal? Divine judgment? Nobody knew. The palace survivors had no answers. Only the fact of his death. The terrible, undeniable fact. A tech priest passed through the holding bay carrying a data slate. Silas stopped him. What happens now? What's the plan? The priest's augmented eyes whirred as they focused. Plan? There is no plan. We evacuate who we can. Save what records survive. Attempt to warn distant fleets, he paused, and pray that humanity can endure what comes next. But without the Emperor. Without the Emperor, the priest interrupted. We are orphans. Children abandoned in the dark with monsters at the door. We will endure or perish on our own merits now. The master of mankind is gone. His great crusade is finished. The priest moved on, leaving Silas with those words. His great crusade is finished. 200 years of conquest and reunification, all predicated on the Emperor's leadership and power. Without him, what was the Imperium? Just scattered worlds held together by nothing but memory and faith. And faith, Silas was learning, died easily in the face of such horror. 3 weeks had passed since Terra fell. 3 weeks of desperate evacuation. 3 weeks of watching the Imperium's heart die in slow motion. Silas had been transferred to the battleship Eternal Wrath, one of the few capital ships maintaining order in the Sol system. From its observation decks, he watched Terra spiral deeper into damnation. The warp storm consuming the planet had stabilized into something permanent, a festering wound in reality that showed no signs of healing. The crew called it the Eye of Terra, a sick mirror of the galaxy's other great warp rift. He'd been assigned menial duties again, processing refugee manifests, tracking supply consumption. The mundane work helped, gave his mind something to focus on besides the nightmares that came whenever he tried to sleep. In dreams, he still saw the Emperor dissolving on the Golden Throne, still felt that psychic shockwave obliterating everything he'd believed was permanent. The ship's corridors buzzed with rumors. Some claimed the Emperor had been assassinated by Xenos infiltrators. Others whispered about chaos corruption within the palace itself. A few insisted it was the Emperor's own plan, some incomprehensible strategy beyond mortal understanding. Silas knew better. He'd been there, seen the truth. The master of mankind had simply ended, like a star burning out. No conspiracy, no grand design, just death. The reports from across the Imperium grew worse daily. Without the Astronomicon, entire sectors had gone dark. Fleet elements scattered across the galaxy found themselves isolated. Some attempted the journey home using conventional drives, voyages that would take lifetimes. Others established themselves as local warlords, the Great Crusade's conquests fragmenting into feudal kingdoms. A few had already declared independence, their commanders reasoning that without the Emperor's authority, they owed Terra nothing. But the worst reports came from worlds nearest the Eye of Terra. The warp's expansion hadn't stopped at Terra. It spread outward in a sphere of corruption, consuming nearby systems. Mars had been first. The red planet's forges fell silent as reality storms shredded its atmosphere. The mechanicum's priesthood fractured immediately, some fleeing, others choosing to die with their sacred machines. Humanity's greatest source of technology was gone, just gone. Luna followed, then the colonies of Saturn and Jupiter. One by one, humanity's birthright dissolved into madness. The Sol system was becoming uninhabitable. Soon, even the refugee fleets would have to abandon it entirely. Silas was organizing supply crates in Hold 7 Theta when the alert came. All hands to stations. He felt the ship shudder as its engines fired. Through the deck plating, he sensed acceleration. They were moving. Fast. He made his way to an observation port and looked out into the void. Ships were gathering. Hundreds of them. Every vessel that had survived Terra's fall was converging on a single point in space, far beyond Pluto's orbit. Battleships, cruisers, transport barges loaded with refugees, even damaged hulks that barely maintained life support. They formed a ragged fleet, the last remnant of imperial authority in the Sol system. Then Silas saw why they'd gathered. A figure stood in the void between ships. Impossible, insane, yet undeniably there. Humanoid, massive, wreathed in golden light that even the vacuum couldn't diminish. At first, Silas thought the Emperor had somehow returned. His heart leapt with desperate hope. But no, this was someone else. Something else. The figure raised one hand, and suddenly Silas heard a voice inside his skull. Not words. Pure meaning transmitted directly into consciousness. Every mind in the fleet received it simultaneously. Refugee and officer. Human and servitor. Even the machine spirits of the ships themselves seemed to hear. Children of humanity. Your Emperor is dead. Your Imperium is broken. Your future is ash. But you need not perish with it. The golden figure gestured toward the warp storm consuming Terra. As if in response, the storm pulsed, changed. The chaotic colors resolved into something more structured. An image formed in the storm's depths. A vision. I am what comes next. I am the new order. Embrace me, and I shall guide you through the darkness. Reject me, and join your Emperor in oblivion. Silas felt pressure building in his mind. Not violent, seductive, The figure was offering something. Survival, purpose, a replacement for what they'd lost. All it required was acceptance, submission, worship of something new. Around him, people began reacting. Some fell to their knees, drawn by the offer. Others screamed, recognizing the trap for what it was. Across the ship, crew members collapsed. Some wept, some laughed. A few simply stared, minds unable to process this new impossibility layered atop so many others. On the observation deck, a captain, the same one who'd commanded the Thunderhawk escape, stood firm. His hand found the vox control. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the fleet channels. No, we are the Imperium, built on reason, on science, on human achievement. We don't bow to gods. We never have. We never will. The golden figure's attention focused on the eternal wrath. Silas felt its gaze like physical pressure. The ship's hull groaned. Lights flickered. Then die with your pride intact, fool. The entity raised both hands. The warp storm around Terra convulsed. Tendrils of corrupted reality reached out toward the fleet. Ships began vanishing where the tendrils touched. Not destroyed. Translated into the warp. Consumed. The entity was demonstrating its power, showing the cost of defiance. But the captain didn't yield. He turned to his crew. All ships, scatter formation. Make for the system edge at maximum burn. We don't bow, we survive, and we remember what we were. The fleet fractured. Some ships fled. Others moved toward the golden figure, their crews having accepted the offer. Still others simply drifted, their command structures paralyzed by impossible choice. The eternal wrath burned hard for empty space. Its engines redlined. Its hull shook with the strain. Behind them, the entity's voice echoed one final time. Run then. But know this, without your emperor, you are prey. The galaxy will devour you. And when you are desperate enough, broken enough, you will come crawling back. They always do. The voice faded. The golden figure dissolved back into the warp. But its presence lingered, a promise and a threat wrapped into one. Silas clung to a support beam as the ship's acceleration continued. Around him, survivors processed what they'd witnessed. Another horror added to an endless list. Days later, the eternal wrath crossed the heliopause. They'd escaped the Sol system. Barely. Of the thousands of ships that had gathered, fewer than 300 made it out. The rest were gone. Either taken by the entity or lost to warp storms. A meeting was called. Every ship's senior officer, every surviving official. They gathered via hololithic link to discuss what came next. Silas attended as a witness, brought along because he'd been in the sanctum when the Emperor died. His testimony had become valuable, evidence of what had been lost. The debate raged for hours. Some argued for finding the scattered Primarchs. The Emperor's sons, surely they could restore order. Others insisted on establishing a new capital elsewhere. A few radicals suggested abandoning the Imperium entirely, starting fresh somewhere beyond chaos's reach. But gradually, a consensus emerged. They had to warn the rest of humanity, had to tell the galaxy what had occurred. The Great Crusade's fleets were still out there, planets still loyal. If they could be reached, warned, perhaps humanity could endure this catastrophe. It would take decades, centuries even, without the Astronomicon. Ships would have to travel using short warp jumps, hoping not to encounter demons. Messages would spread slowly, at sublight speeds in some regions. But it was possible. Difficult. Dangerous. But possible. The fleet divided. Each ship taking responsibility for a different sector. Each crew becoming missionaries of terrible truth. They would scatter across the galaxy, carrying one message. The Emperor is dead. The Imperium has fallen. Survive however you can. Silas volunteered for the mission without hesitation. He had no family left, no ties to any world. His entire identity had been wrapped up in serving the Imperium. If that Imperium was dead, then at least he could serve its memory. The eternal wrath made for the galactic east, toward the 500 worlds of Ultramar. If any region could survive independently, it would be them. Their Primarch, Robut Gilliman, was renowned for his administrative genius. If he could be warned, Perhaps he could preserve something of what the Emperor had built. The journey was nightmare. The warp had become a howling storm. Every jump risked materialization inside a demon-infested hell. Ships were lost. Crew members went mad, but they pressed forward, driven by desperate purpose. Months became years, years became decades. Silas aged in the service of this impossible mission. His hair grayed, his body weakened, but he endured. They all did, because someone had to tell the truth. Finally, they reached Ultramar's borders. The signals they detected told a story. The region had organized. Guilliman had indeed established order. Without Terra's guidance, he'd created his own micro-empire. Not a rebellion. There was nothing left to rebel against. Just survival. The Eternal Wrath made contact, transmitted their message, and waited. Guilliman himself responded. His face appeared on the hololithic display, perfect and ageless. The Primarch listened to their testimony without interruption, watched the recordings Silas had made in the sanctum, studied the evidence of his father's death. When they finished, Guilliman was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. The Emperor is dead. Very well. Then we, his children, must carry on his work. Not as gods, not as tyrants, but as guardians of what he tried to build. Humanity will survive this. We will endure, because we have no other choice. Silas felt something inside him finally break. The tears came, not from grief. He'd exhausted that long ago. From relief. Someone understood. Someone would continue the fight. The Primarch's image leaned forward. You have done humanity a great service, bringing this knowledge. Rest now. You've earned it. The transmission ended. Silas collapsed into a chair, suddenly feeling every one of his years. He'd survived. The mission was complete. Humanity's future wasn't assured. It never would be again. But at least now they knew the truth, could prepare, could adapt. Outside the viewing port, Ultramar's worlds glittered in the darkness. Beacons of civilization in an increasingly hostile galaxy. Not the imperium that had been, but perhaps something that could endure. Something built not on one man's power, but on humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. Silas closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the Emperor one final time, dissolving on the golden throne, ending. But maybe, just maybe, in that ending, he'd given humanity one final gift. The chance to stand on their own, to prove they were worthy of the future he'd tried to secure. The ship's engines hummed. Somewhere, crew members celebrated. Others mourned. Life continued, as it always did, as it always would.